Australia's weather forecast for December all the way through August is ahead in this video. Matt Makins here. This weather watch is going to be different. I've taken in your YouTube user feedback, some polls that I've posted, and we're going to be talking more about the global impact here in this weather watch. Many of you expressed interest in Australia, and Australia is really a fascinating country when it comes to weather patterns, almost the opposite of what we look for across North America and the U.S. So we're going to be chatting about La Nina and the impact for Australia going forward. The fascinating thing about La Nina is when you hear that in North America, we think drought or drought problems. If you hear that in Australia, you're thinking wet, the opposite. Very wet patterns can happen in La Nina phases. This is since September 1st. So we're going throughout this spring, and spring to date, very, very wet, especially Victoria, New South Wales. Very, very wet. This is a combination of La Nina and another area, the Indian Ocean. When the configuration there is cooler to the west, you get a cold phase of the Indian Ocean dipole, it's called. But that influences the monsoon that we hear about throughout Asia and Southeast Asia into Australia. And the impact here is we combined a very cold phase, IOD, and a very cold phase, ENSO, which was La Nina. Bring them together, very wet conditions across Australia. Now the opposite happens when we talk about El Nino. El Nino brings in very drought-driven properties across the country. So in North America, we talk about El Nino almost not glowingly, but in more positive light than how we refer to La Nina, and it's the opposite in Australia. Let's get into the forecast details. La Nina is very much present. Here are your global sea surface temperatures throughout the month of October into early November. The boxes I've highlighted here are the three main ENSO regions. You can combine this one, 4 and 3, to make the 3.4 region, which is just right in here. But bottom line is La Nina is present. La Nina is very strong. If you look at the SOI, Southern Oscillation Index for La Nina, it's a way to measure it. It's measuring how the atmosphere just above the ocean is behaving. That index in October was third strongest of all Octobers on record, going back to 1950. So this La Nina, which has been, ranked in the top 5, as depending on methodology, since last winter into spring, we're still talking about a very robust La Nina. And that's not going to change for a little while. What has changed in the interest of Australia and Asia, we're looking at a warming period of the Indian Ocean here, the Arabian Sea. This is going to start to diminish the impact of that Indian Ocean dipole, the IOD. It's diminishing that impact as that trends back to neutral. But La Nina will remain the main driver. But for how long? It is going to continue for quite a while. NOAA, CPC, outlook for La Nina. The blue bars here are representing La Nina, and here's our months, October, November, December. And then let's get into next spring. Spring for North America. Fall for down to the south, March, April, May here. And notice the length of that gray bar starting to climb. So bottom line here is we go throughout the northern hemisphere winter, southern hemisphere summer. We're going to be bringing down La Nina and starting to increase those chances for a neutral pattern or an El Nino pattern. El Nino would probably wait into 2023. It's not going to be happening the first part. This is just sea surface temperatures. The atmosphere above will take some time to adjust. See, the ocean and the atmosphere like to be coupled together. They can be. They don't have to be, but they like to be coupled together. And that's why cold Pacific waters there, the ENSO region, La Nina, drives the atmosphere globally. As they begin to transition, let's say the sea surface temperatures transition, it takes a while for the atmosphere above to recouple with that change. So yes, sea surface conditions may trend more neutral or even lean El Nino into the mid parts of 2023, but the atmosphere above is not likely to adjust just yet. So what does this mean across Australia? We've talked about this in other breakout videos for North America, from Alaska through Canada into the States and even Mexico. But what about Australia? Here's December through February's outlook. We have some wetness. Queensland, kind of coastal areas here, good sugarcane areas. And then on down to the south, we taper off that wetness. Drier areas would be across the north and the west. That's the precip outlook for December, January, and February. Temperature-wise, warmest to the west, Coldest in a small pocket, well, I shouldn't say small pocket, but coldest in a pocket here across the east. And this does match modeling, and to a large extent it matches the seasonal outlook provided by the Bureau of Meteorology, BOM, from Australia. So these outlooks are very similar, whether you look at modeling or the division you look at or agency you look at for forecasts. This particular outlook, the precip one and temperature one, is based on analog years. I build forecasts based on looking at historic patterns, finding the most similar years, best fit years to where we are and where we are headed, and pull those years, average them together. That's composing these. So it's nice to see the agreement between the analog or best fit year forecast, what the BOM is forecasting, and what computer models are forecasting. It's nice to have the agreement amongst the three. A lot of those modeling stop in February. They only give about a 3-month window of time. Let's go beyond. And how do we do that? A little bit of a combination of modeling, but mostly relying on an analog forecast. And for that, we're going to keep the IOD relatively neutral. We're going to start to bring down La Niña in the sea surface conditions, but keep La Niña throughout March, April, May in terms of the atmosphere. And this is what that means across Australia. Precipitation here across the north to be favorable. Some parts down to the south from Victoria, northward up to about Brisbane or so, still possibly wet, but generally neutral conditions as you look out to the west. That's in terms of precipitation. What about temperatures? This surprised me, going through the analog years, seeing this bullseye of cold that covers so much of the country. This area, this same region, if this is not only an analog forecast, but if you look at this region and you look at correlations, between Australian temperatures and La Niña. The stronger La Niña is, the stronger the statistical correlation is to colder areas here. But remember, we're trying to taper off La Niña. So that's why this area of cold surprises me in the analog years. I selected analog years that are coming out of La Niña and headed into neutral. So I do think there's going to be some colder pockets here in Australia from March through May. But as far as that much cold, that remains to be seen. That tells me the atmosphere is not transitioning like the oceans. So the forecast, La Niña trending to neutral by March, April, May, that's the oceans. The atmosphere is not going to respond yet. So we may still see the residual impact of La Niña in our temperatures. But again, precipitation from March through May favors the north, favors the southeast. There again are your temperatures, an explanation of why there's a bullseye of cold there. I bet it's a bit more moderate than that, a bit warmer, but we'll see how things pan out. Now let's look through June through August. I know that's a long way down the highway here, but let's just kick the can down the road, if you will. Let's consider a neutral La Niña pattern in both atmosphere and ocean. That's likely where we will be. It's not only likely based on modeling, but it's also likely based on history. So if you're combining an analog forecast, trying to compare it to what modeling indicates, this is the direction we are going. Returning to very neutral conditions, June through August, in terms of precip. Southeast may favor the most. This shouldn't be shocking. If you're transitioning your atmosphere into a neutral phase, going from La Niña, trying to transition, and we're awaiting that next phase, whether it be El Niño or stay neutral, hugely unlikely, but La Niña, very unlikely. So let's plan on neutral or heading into El Niño. It's not surprising to see relatively moderate conditions across the country, June through August. Temperatures, going to focus the heat up closer to Darwin and some colder pockets here, Brisbane up to about Mackay or so. But overall, we're getting rid of this huge impact of wetness from the IOD and La Niña that we've seen recently. We're steering away from that in gradual timeline, gradual transition into a more temperate, more average precip kind of based forecast as we go throughout the next 6 months or so. Now the problem for Australia is if we hit a full-blown El Niño later in 2023 into 2024, things dry out very quickly. Some of the worst drought we've had of the last several decades happen with robust El Niños. I'm just going to leave you with a parting thought. If you want to compare this transitional phase that we may be going through, now La Niña, then neutral, then El Nino. You may want to look at years like 2013, 2014, 2015. A very similar transitional phase may be happening that we saw just about, oh, not quite 10 years ago. But that would be the most similar, most recent transitional phase to compare where we're headed to. That's a look at what we're talking about for Australia. So if you commented about wanting more of a world view as we break down seasonal forecasting, there you go for Australia. In future videos, I'll have more on Canada, more on North America down through Mexico, as well as Europe. We'll see you the next time. I'm Matt Makins.